PECT. There we go, and over to you, Lauren.
Thanks, Heidi, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. It's a great series, so I'm glad that Waste has sort of managed to get onto the series as well. I am a senior project coordinator, as Heidi mentioned, and I work across 2 projects. And so a lot of my day-to-day is focused on delivering waste reduction projects. So that's sort of reducing recycling contamination in flat blocks to minimising food waste in school kitchens. So today I'll dive a little bit into the problems of waste and the current solutions that we can talk about. I'll introduce this term, the circular economy, which is becoming a term that's more and more familiar with us all, and then just provide a few recommendations that we can take back with us. So next slide, please, Heidi. So first of all, I just wanted to get us thinking really about the different waste streams that we have within the school. So what waste and materials that we use, what do we regularly put in the bin, what might we have to replace at some point in time. So it's really things like, I guess, paper, pens, tables, chairs, food packaging, ink cartridges, wallpaper. So really sort of think about the things that you might throw away on a daily basis. Next slide, please, Heidi. Thank you. And now let's put that into context. So according to the latest data, the UK generated 222 million tonnes of waste in 2018, and England was responsible for 84% of that total. So to put that into perspective, the Empire State Building here was created using 62,000 tonnes of concrete. So if we were to replace that concrete with waste as a building material, we might expect to build 358 Empire State Buildings out of the UK's waste from just a single year. So it's quite a staggering figure. So imagine really the New York skyline sort of littered with waste. But unfortunately, the next slide, please, Heidi, it's really not too hard to imagine when we see beaches like this. So it's something that I think everyone sort of thinks about on a day-to-day basis, and it's a very popular topic, I think, in sustainability. So besides the obvious visual impact that waste has on our environment, I think it's important we explore first the waste management solutions that we may be familiar with and the current conversations around them. Now, I don't admit to being a technical expert at all, but hopefully I can sort of contextualize the situation that we find ourselves in now. So starting on the left, we all know that poor waste management is a significant threat to our ecosystems, and I believe we sort of incorporate that in some of our lessons and curriculum. So decomposing waste on landfill sites, and especially on poorly managed facilities, creates harmful liquids, which we call leachates, which can contaminate nearby soils and water sources, affecting land and aquatic life, water quality, and even human health. And decomposing matter on landfill also generates carbon dioxide and methane in particular is a very potent greenhouse gas. And whilst there is technology in place to capture some of this methane, I did actually read somewhere recently that a sort of metaphor really, that landfills are like the planet's bin bags that sit in the kitchen, but we don't have a bin lorry to take them away. So landfill is not really a sustainable solution. But what about energy from waste facilities? Energy recovery plants like we have in Peterborough, they burn our waste to create heat or electricity, which can replace the energy produced by coal or fuel. So in some ways it is a sustainable solution, but it might not be a long-term solution. So a recent study by Zero Waste Scotland found that as the electricity grid decarbonises, so as we use more renewables, burning our waste for electricity can actually have a larger climate impact than just taking from the grid. And what's more, the solution disincentivises recycling, as we feel that we're still doing a good thing, even if we do throw things in the general waste, which could be recycled. So recycling really is important. It's a way of recovering materials and using the materials that we have already extracted and processed. But again, it's not the silver bullet. When we recycle materials, often we reduce its value as the material reduces in quality. So ultimately, this is all just my long-winded introduction to the concept that dominates many conversations, not just in waste management, but actually across economic growth, social innovation, consumerism, environmentalism, and that is the circular economy. Next slide, please, Heidi. So the key tenets of the circular economy really are to design out waste in the first place. That's the number one of the circular economy. We need to design products that last a lot longer and that we can sort of disassemble and repair and recycle. So that means we can keep materials in use for longer, and we don't have to necessarily throw them away straight away. We reuse them, we repair them, we return them back into the system and start the whole process again. So essentially, we're not actually creating any waste, we're just creating things that we can use again and again. And this model is based on the sort of nature, really. It's regenerating nature. As leaves fall from the trees, they decompose and they're used again for growth of another plant. So it's really based on a natural system. Next slide. And this is the Brighton Waste House. So the circular economy is really about finding creative solutions for our waste, designing it out in the first place. And sort of reflecting on that Empire State Building analogy earlier on, this actually is a house made from waste materials. Its external walls are covered in sort of reversed carpet tiles. So if you lift them up, there's carpet on the other side. They have been fire tested. The interior walls are covered in plyboard, which were discarded from construction sites. So a lot of the time they overorder and have a lot of surplus materials. So those were used in this building. The insulation, which whilst building compliant, is also filled with 2,500 toothbrushes, videotapes, discarded jean offcuts, which were actually purchased simply to cut them into shorts, which was astounding to hear. So it really was a project to demonstrate the vast number of materials that make up our buildings that we live in before even filling them with stuff in the first place. And what was fun about this project as well was it was built by 300 college students as part of their design and construction courses. So the circular economy really has huge opportunities, both in terms of materials and in job creation as well. But how does this relate to a school? So, well, schools create a lot of waste, we know that, but we all have a lot of influence over how we control that, especially when we have so many young leaders at our disposal. So the first thing that we can be doing is conducting a waste audit, thinking about what we as a school create, what waste we create and how we dispose of that waste, and building a fuller picture about whether we can actually identify certain materials that we can reduce. So these are some of the key questions that we can be asking ourselves through that audit. Thanks, Heidi. And whilst you can be doing a school-wide audit, your students can be creating a waste plan of their own with Fox's Waste Adventure, which can be done as a class or as homework. And the waste journal here explores which items students waste the most. So it introduces the concepts of refill and reuse over single use with the sustainable swaps game on the right, and allows space for students to create their own pledges for reduction. So this is a great way of sort of combining your school-wide audit with students' sort of involvement as well. This is a free resource that you can get from PECT very easily, to just let us know. And then there's some calculators as well that are, again, free to use and very engaging. So we look at a paper calculator here, which looks at the impact of how much paper we are using, whether you're using sort of virgin materials or recycled materials. We can compare the impact of that in terms of water, energy, greenhouse gases, that sort of thing. And then on the right, we've got the waste calculator. So in here, I think you've got a 10-year-old basically. So since they were born, they would have created 6,000 kilograms, so 6 tons of general waste. So it's a really engaging way to draw students into the waste situation. Thanks, Heidi. So to the pledges we as teaching staff can do around school. In terms of the waste hierarchy, we always put reduce at the top and recycle further down the waste hierarchy. So once you've done that audit, it's great to look at how you can cut down on certain waste streams. So are you able to buy in bulk? Are you able to find a new supplier with alternative packaging? And are you looking at refills as well? That would save significantly on buying new packaging. There was a school recently that have gone plastic free, I believe Orton Whiston. They banned plastic cups, straws, bottles and bags from their school. So a really comprehensive sort of ban on single-use plastics there, and went to reusable materials. So that's always a really good way to start, is to look at those single-use items and think about where you can go and to convert to reused materials. Are there enough clearly labelled recycling bins around school? Sorry, previous slide again, Heidi. Thank you. This is actually quite it's a very simple solution, but something that can have a quite big impact. Just having enough bins and enough instructions for people to use them, and it becomes then into their daily habits. So I think this is something that can be quite an easy fix. And then try alternative recycling collections. So there are lots of schemes out there like TerraCycle and Ink Bin, where they collect hard to recycle materials. So St John Fisher School the other day, I think Heidi mentioned that they've been collecting crisp packets, and there's a project linked with that where they've been sewing the crisp packets together into foil blankets that can be used, I think, within homeless shelters, which is a really, really great project for the school to get involved in. So there's all sorts of ways that we can identify just one material and find a solution for just that one material. And then again, consider your paper usage. I know it's really difficult within schools, but I was speaking with someone recently, their school use worksheets, they print worksheets off and then put them into their books. Is there a way for them to go directly and write into their books rather than worksheets for every single lesson? So it's really just identifying those different options. Thank you, Heidi. So now we're on to food waste. This might be an automatic, you might have to press for each option, sorry, Heidi. So food waste is quite a big thing, and I think we see it a lot. Whilst the kitchens might have an understanding of the food that they create and the portion sizes, the plate waste is always quite a significant one to look at, particularly within schools. And I know it's very challenging with the different sort of food standards and how and what students like to eat. So the first thing to do is really just get staff and students on board. So that's assemblies, lesson plans, team meetings, build up conversation around waste management, and get everyone on board with that. You can then monitor and reduce the food waste in your kitchen. So you can actually sort of weigh the waste as you go along. And I'll mention a project in a minute, Cool Food Pro, which has lots of guidance around how to do that. And we are supporting some schools within Peterborough now by doing that. And consider how your food is presented and served. So that's looking at your portion sizes, your presentation, what's the dining experience like? You can do all of this by actually conducting a plate waste survey. So as I said, if you get your staff and students on board, you can go out there and find some feedback really on how the kitchen can sort of adjust their practices slightly to reduce waste. How are the menus communicated to students and families? So when do families order the meals, for example, that might have some sway over the wastage of that day. Are you saying in such a way that could actually, it's maybe not particularly attractive, or maybe there's some words that students might not understand as part of that meal? All of these sorts of things are really important when we think about food waste. And then consider alternative disposal methods. So if it is possible, and I know it's not always accessible within schools on such small budgets, can you compost? Have you got access to an anaerobic digester? Is there possibility for linking with the council's food waste collections, or looking at sort of external services? It's always good if you can't necessarily, if you've reduced it as much as you can, is there a way of recycling food waste so it doesn't just go to landfill? When food waste decomposes, it does produce a lot of methane. So that's one of the things that we can look at to reduce our impact there. Thanks, Heidi. And so these are two resources that are free to use. So the Cool Food Pro project has been a long-term project for us. It's a carbon calculator, so it essentially looks at the practices that caterers do, and we look to improve those practices and see the environmental savings as a result. So one of those impacts is the food waste. So once we've reduced food waste and we've started weighing it in the kitchen, we can actually input that data into this calculator and understand our environmental savings as a result, which is a great reporting tool. It's a great way to engage the students, and it just sort of links that idea of practice in school with environmental impact. And then we've got our food smart resources as part of Healthy Schools, tons of lesson plans and activities to empower the students to reduce their own food waste. So we're really linking there with the practices within the kitchen to our sort of everyday work within the school. And then finally, I think it's important to note, especially when we talk about the circular economy, it's important to think about what we buy and how we buy it. So really reviewing your current procurement policy. Are there certain things that you could maybe add in there that will encourage sustainable practice, will make you think about the materials that you buy and what their end of life might be. It's very easy to sort of just buy lots of things, but what is the impact of that when you waste it? And so buying secondhand could actually be a very easy alternative. The materials are already out there, they've already been produced and used before, why not use them again? That's a very good principle of the circular economy. And then you could easily use what's already there, nature's resources essentially. So this is all around Heidi's work on Nature School. So we're using nature, the leaves that fall from the trees, the wind, all sorts. So it's amazing sort of resources that are there at your disposal. So thank you, Heidi. And I think that's it. I've rattled through that really quickly, actually. So you've all got a lot of time back. But I appreciate that was a fair bit of information in terms of all the sort of tips that you could be using, which you may or may not have heard before. I think we all know we need to be doing something in this climate emergency, but I think within a school environment, it's very difficult to implement some of that on our day-to-day, especially when we've got tons of other things to be doing. But I think hopefully you've got a little bit more information about that term, the circular economy, and how we can feed into that. But I think the first place to start would certainly be to do a waste audit, to really understand what materials you use, what you waste, and involve your students in that process. Create an action plan and even just focus on one or two materials and go from there. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us here at PECT.
Thank you very much, Lauren. Hopefully everyone's seen the benefit to today's session. I'm just going